There is plenty of speculation that New Zealand has never been so polarised as it is today. A short peruse of the hashtag NZPoll Twitter reveals not only a lot of obsessive tweets about me, but also a plethora of partisan toxicness poisoning the discourse. The left hates the right hates the far left is tyrannical and bonkers, the far right is furious and hyperbolic, and the centre is loathed by everyone else. But what does it all mean? What is left? What is right? What are the principles and values that underpin these points on the political spectrum? I'm joined in the studio now by Dr. Bryce Edwards to unpick what some of the jargon we use almost every day, but sometimes without understanding fully. Hello, Bryce.
Hi, Annie.
Hi, thank you for coming in today.
No trouble.
I haven't really given you much of a brief on our discussion, except that I want to talk about what is left and what is right. First of all, what would be, if someone said to you, what is a typical left-winger, what would you say?
Wow, great question. I mean, the first thing I would have to say, though, first, Annie, is that these are all kind of socially constructed terms. They're ones that don't actually have any grounding in, there's no right and wrong for what they are. They're things that have evolved as descriptions for, political positions, and, we can use it to describe politicians or ourselves as voters and all sorts of things happening in society. And so I think it's worth thinking about where the term left came from, and it comes from obviously the spectrum of left and right, and it was first used after the French Revolution, 1889 or 1789, the French Revolution, and in the Parliament after that revolution, we had one side of the debate really sitting to the right of the speaker, and the other side sitting to the left. Those on the right were those that were in favour of the existing order, of the aristocracy, of conservatism, if you like. Those on the left were the revolutionaries, essentially, those that wanted to overturn society and make progress, change the French country. And so ever since then, it's kind of been taken as this this dichotomy, these kind of opposing ideas of left. I mean, I'm a bit of a purist on these things, even though there is no exact consensus on how to use these things. But I see left and right as an economic spectrum. And so they're tied up with the economy, with what political scientists often call materialism. So they're all about those traditional ideas of, taxation, spending by governments, the welfare state, provision of, roads and all those traditional issues, whereas post-materialism is something else. Maybe we'll talk about that soon, but
I'm sure we will.
so left and right basically see things very differently on how to organise the world in terms of resources and money, etc. So yes, to answer your question in a long-winded way, the left typically are those that want greater spread of resources or wealth or incomes amongst society. They don't want great hierarchies. They want more collectivism, so people working together. They're not big believers in competition. They prefer cooperation. They tend to be, the institutions of the left tend to be trade unions and other sort of collectivist organisations. They tend to want a bigger state, a bigger government, if you like, spending more money, raising more taxes. And then on the right, you've got those that believe more in about efficiency, a smaller state, less taxation, giving more power to the individual, smaller government expenditure and therefore less taxation, a bit more emphasis on, I think, individuals' rights and property rights. And so, these things kind of translate into different political parties. And you've got in different countries, you normally have a main left-wing party and a main right-wing party, at least in Western industrialised countries. And so here in New Zealand, Labour historically has meant left, National historically meant right. And we can kind of get a gist of how that plays out.
Cool, thank you for that. That was a good summary. You mentioned post-materialism. Am I right in thinking that the post-material aspects of the political world are more in line with the identity stuff, the untangible aspects of politics.
Yes. So that's a good way of putting it, especially the untangible idea. So, I mean, I think left and right is a really important sort of way of understanding the world, and especially understanding New Zealand politics, but it doesn't explain everything. So much of New Zealand society and politics is outside that left-right sort of economic way of seeing things. And so especially in the last maybe 50 years, we've had lots of issues that have come up that don't neatly fit that. Maybe environmentalism, things around war and nuclear weapons, things around what the state does in terms of censorship or how it protects us, issues often around gender, ethnicity. Those are often, sometimes they have a lot of overlap with left-right stuff, but I don't really see them as traditionally left and right. They are, as you say, post-material. And so the terms of maybe liberal and conservative, I think, are more useful in that regard. And so, liberals will tend on that post-materialist spectrum to want to progress certain areas around gender, ethnicity. They want to have less state involvement in saying what we do in our bedrooms or our private lives, whereas those on the conservative end are more, traditionally at least, wanting to clamp down and have a lot more social order and, those traditional, maybe religious ideas about how people should run their lives. But of course, that's a really basic sort of description of those things, and all ideologies much more complex than there's lots of people that are left wing, for example, that completely disagree on really important things. It's just as there's lots of liberal people on that post-materialist thing that have disagreements on, say, something like gender.
Absolutely, it's a very interesting thing that as humans I don't know if we've evolved or if it was always the case, but we've felt a need to often attach ourselves to these tribes, and we kind of say, right, this is my team here, and it doesn't really matter what the team does, they'll stick with the team. Yeah,
now that's I think a really important part of understanding this, in the sense that there are certain parts of society that therefore are on one of those ideological areas. And of course, before getting onto that tribe stuff, it is worth thinking about how some demographics do naturally tend into those certain areas. So traditionally, at least, the poor, the working class would tend to be more left-wing in their thinking and would vote for the left-wing party. Traditionally, more middle-class professionals would vote for the right. And we can think about other demographics that might have a certain social characteristic in their politics. But like I said before, this translates sometimes to parties, so what you might call tribes. And I think that's part of the problem that you were talking about at the start, that we start having polarisation because people see it as a sort of almost like a sports game, that I support the Warriors or I support a certain team, and no matter what they do, I'm on their side.
That's definitely how the Warriors fans feel, I think.
That's right. And so it is tribal in that sense, that and it almost becomes often a kind of unintelligent sort of my team, or it's like a nationalist idea. I was born in this country, so therefore I support New Zealand, and I back New Zealand and everything. No matter what the government does, I'm going to defend it. And we get that same sort of thinking that's moved into the political sphere, which we are seeing more and more, in my view, that if I'm left-wing, I support Labour. And if I support Labour, I will defend everything they do, and I will attack the other side. And
it's ugly.
It is ugly, and it's not very helpful for democracies. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a team, but we need to be critical thinkers, and we need to be able to disagree with our side, and and be prepared to stand up and not also then get ejected from that team, which is part of the problem. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot more. So a lot of individuals might disagree, but they know that if I say something against my national party, I'm going to get into a lot of trouble with
There's more purity politics.
It is, absolutely. And so you're talking about polarisation at the start, and you can kind of have different types of polarisation. One is whereby people become more extreme or maybe radical or more in their different views. But that's quite different to the tribalised polarisation. So that sort of polarisation just might mean that people get more or stronger in their principles and their beliefs. And if you're on the right, you might feel stronger about free market economics and the need to deregulate or whatever. That's one form of polarisation. And in my view, that's a healthy form of polarisation. There's nothing wrong with people moving to the left or right or out of the centre, for example.
On an issue.
On an issue or on lots of issues. The problem is when it's a partisan polarisation, and that you become so attached to your side and you dislike people that are attached to a different side. And you don't just disagree with them, and that's fine. It's great to have disagreement or conflict.
We like it here.
Yeah, why not? And I think it's to be encouraged. So in that sense, I'm in favour of polarisation. It's when it's a partisan, tribal polarisation and you have a dislike for that person on the other side.
On the grounds of them being the other, on the grounds of them being the other, them having the wrong opinion, exactly, and then turning into quite as we see, nasty, and and that's not good for democracy, So I think it's really important that we have things like the platform, and we have other forms of media, and what is often called the public sphere, where people can meet, whether it's online or whatever, and disagree respectively. So sometimes in the whole polarisation debate, there's this sort of feeling that we need to get more consensus and more sort of be nicer to each other, and that's kind of all true, but I see nothing wrong with absolutely disagreeing with people and strongly, but still treating them with respect. I think that's the key, isn't it? We've got very preoccupied with kindness, and I would be quite fine if you came in here and very directly told me that you disagreed with me on X.
I'm happy to. I agree. I disagree with lots of things with you.
I know we do, but we still manage to have really good chats often, and that's the important thing. And I've never quite understood, and as I was actually saying to a caller just before you came in, my dad has always been a swing voter. He's not ever had a affiliation with a party, and so that was how I grew up. Was each election he kind of decided who he was going for that election, and so the idea of being very attached to one side or the other isn't something that I kind of grew up with.
Yes, so maybe you benefited from that.
I think I did, actually. Yeah. I think I did. You said, you mentioned the working class traditional attachment to the left, Labour, and the opposite. One thing that I have been really interested in is in the UK and also to an extent the US, we've seen a little bit of reversal. So
yes,
particularly in the UK, if you look at even their local body elections recently, you've got a lot more working class people voting Conservative and more of the educated elite voting for Labour. And we saw with Trump in America that he picked up a lot of that working class vote, specifically in kind of the middle America. So is that, are they kind of anomalies, or what do you think's happening there?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much to discuss here. Yeah. We could talk about this for days, but you're absolutely right. And it was something that started happening really after the Second World War. We started to see, especially in the 60s onwards, that there was kind of a de-alignment between those traditional patterns I talked about before, and we started to have the left in particular becoming a creature more of the middle class. And so whereas traditionally, say, the New Zealand Labour Party would have been politicians and activists that came out of trade unions, out of the working class, that started changing. And so if you look at the New Zealand Labour Party from the 1970s and into the 80s, you started to see a lot of quite middle-class people move into the party and kind of take it over, essentially. And so it became a party of academics, dare I say, and people from very professional backgrounds. And that was the fourth Labour government, essentially. That was the first Labour government that wasn't really a working-class government. And
I've noticed with this current lot, if they hadn't have had such a massive win, that would still be the case. They picked up some working class or community-based MPs, I would say, just simply because of how big they were. But if you look at the top part of the party, they still are a lot like that.
I think you're quite right about that. I hadn't noticed that in particular, but yes. And so I guess it is my ongoing critique of the Labour Party that it's not very working class, and it orientates more to upper income voters, and it wins those votes. I mean, it changes all the time, to be honest, and it's kind of in flux. But yes, we are seeing this throughout the West, that parties traditionally of the left, Labour parties, are winning over more middle class, middle income support, even higher income voters, and we're seeing the parties of the right winning over working class supporters. And so it really disrupts how we understand politics, and
it does,
and it's part of why I think society and the media and political scientists even have had a lot of trouble understanding what the hell is going on over the last 10 or 20 years.
That's why we've had some shocks, right, with Trump and with Brexit.
All these things, absolutely we have. And because we just assume that Hillary Clinton's going to win over the working class because the Democrats are the party of the left of the working class, and vice versa, and it's not the case anymore. And Trump, had a huge support base from those that were struggling, and Hillary Clinton couldn't speak to those people. In fact, she called them deplorables.
I know, and that sticks out to me whenever I feel like it was such a key moment when she just used that term. She said to those voters, "You're dispensable to me. I'm not even going for you."
And we saw, I thought it was a bit of a worrying sign in the weekend, or was it Friday, when the Prime Minister gave her Harvard speech and she talked about the so-called keyboard warriors and how she described them as, I can't remember,
Superman costumes or something.
Yeah, and they were kind of in darkened rooms, sloppily dressed, and she was kind of painting a picture of her opponents being deplorables, these kind of losers, I think she was trying to say.
And it was kind of like it was thematically like the River of Filth from Michael Wood. And I kind of feel like I don't like that in New Zealand politics from either side. I think that we could probably find examples of previous national governments who've been disrespectful as well. But I know that in my echo chambers, because I acknowledge that I exist in them, those kind of comments don't go down well, because I guess the way I see it, we want to have a respectful dialogue with our oppositions, and I was disappointed in that as well. Yeah,
I mean, it's always hard, isn't it? Because sometimes we do want to paint our opponents in a certain way, and we put labels on them and we joke about them, but so I don't know where the boundary
Prime Minister, maybe,
but as Prime Minister, I think it does. It is. Well, I'll put it this way: it's not dangerous. It's dangerous for her electability. I would say, because that really is why Hillary Clinton lost.
It is,
because she was so alienated, so divorced from their traditional supporters, whereas Trump, he was bumbling, he was an idiot, but he embraced them.
And that's the key thing, right? And I know that I found, I do not like Trump. I think that he is quite an odious person. But he figured out how to speak to those people, and he deserved the win that he got. And this idea that all those people were stupid also bothers me, because what it was is that they recognised that side over there weren't going to look after their needs. They looked elsewhere. Yeah.
So for those of us that are on the left, or from sort of metropolitan, cosmopolitan areas like this, and who work in universities like I do, I think we have to be really careful not to get into that sort of superiority and patronising and sneering sort of attitude. And we see it again and again, and the Greens have got a really important role in politics, but they too often fall into that sneering role, and they see themselves as above ordinary people, and it's to their detriment. So you might remember the classic example was they made an advertisement about national then leader Simon Bridges and had him with the bad accent and portrayed him as a used car salesman or something, and it hit the wrong mark, and it came out, it was online or something, and people thought, oh my god, this is really quite nasty, and
it's sort of tasteful.
But it's not just nasty about an opponent, it was nasty about people in general, people that don't speak in the refined way that the Green Party see themselves as speaking.
And Simon has done well for himself now, obviously, but he does come from a working class background, and so his accent was kind of, I guess, recognisable as being from the part of New Zealand and the social class that he was raised in. I mean, you might think, I'm a kind of a long-standing critic of identity politics, but I think identity is important still. I think there are things we can learn from identity politics, and there are things about the representation of certain groups in society that are important. And so when we have a parliament that's missing women or Maori or whatever, those are real concerns, and we have to think about what's stopping, what are barriers to those demographics participating. Absolutely.
But ironically, with identity politics, it's kind of the working class that is the one identity that they never concentrate on.
I rabbit on about this all the time.
And so that Green Party ad was just another example of the sneering middle classes when there was a working class leader, and or at least someone with working class sort of
roots, I guess,
or a personality that exuded that sort of working class. He had to be sort of mocked, like in an official ad. And I do think that Parliament is a place that is alienating for general normal people, and people from backgrounds that aren't normal Labour, Green, or even national sort of professional class backgrounds. And people do speak like Simon Bridges, and the more we have that sneering, the more we're going to continue to have a Parliament that's very unrepresented of our wider population.
Do you think another reason that the working class might be moving in some parts of the West to like the more conservative or to the right would have anything to do with, I guess, a homogenising of fiscal and economic policies, while the working class tend to retain a social conservatism that perhaps Labour, Greens, those kind of people don't understand or speak to?
Yeah, there's a lot of different things there, Annie.
This is a download of where my brain is.
I mean, yes, there's always been that issue of different parts of society having conservative social views, and I tend to think it's exaggerated to what this idea of the working class kind of being backwards socially. But certainly it does occur.
Well, I guess I wouldn't say backwards so much as, some of our working class, if I think about a lot of friends I have in South Auckland who tend to come from religious families. There's a lot of Pacifica families who have religious values. So it's not that they are necessarily backwards, it's that they just want to preserve the status quo as a conservative would. And so maybe don't agree with all of the social policies. And when the party that they traditionally support isn't necessarily doing much difference on the economic front, well then what are they sticking around for?
Yes, that's right. So I do think that both types of politics, I mean, I've kind of characterised them as this economic left-right spectrum and then this post-materialist liberal-conservative spectrum, and both those spectrums are really important. But certainly over the last few decades, I think the main political parties have kind of moved towards the centre on the left-right spectrum, and then it's become those other social issues, if you like, that have become what differentiates the parties. And so if you're in Labour or National, often, your policies on taxation aren't actually that different, or your policies on, state housing aren't that different. So you end up having to deal with promoting other things, leadership, personality, and social issues. And that's how you differentiate your parties. And of course, this is a big problem for Labour, though, because they do still have a lot of working class support in South Auckland, and that is, as you suggest, an area where they're both economically left-wing but socially conservative. And that is a problem for Labour, and it means they have to kind of patch up that sort of that crack in the party. They try and cover it up, but it's a very hard one to do for them. And is it
a matter of the electorate MPs doing a lot of on the ground work there, kind of to?
Well, I don't know. It's not an easy thing to fix. I guess I would use the example of something like, let me think, gay marriage, something around that, where Labour and the left tend to deal with that contradiction, whereby some of the traditional support for the left are not sympathetic to that progress, by just taking it out of the hands of the electorate and have as little debate as possible, keep the debate in Parliament, keep it as a parliamentary debate, and narrow the conversation down and hope those voters won't notice or will forgive us for voting the wrong way. Whereas I think that's absolutely the wrong way to progress for the left. I think you need to you need to convince those people. You need to actually have a public campaign. You have to have more debate. It takes a lot more time, and it's frustrating for politicians who just want to do things and don't want to spend their time, actually talking to people.
Yeah.
But ultimately, that's how you get social progress.
And I agree completely with that.
Not just from an elitist top-down approach. I mean, I'd say the same about something like anti-smacking. I was in favour of the anti-smacking legislation, but I thought it was done the wrong way. It should have been a societal conversation that kind of convinced people and got the whole of society going forward on that.
Was it John Key just in the end agreed to it?
With Helen Clark on that.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's not the best example. I don't know, but we too often, when it comes to social issues, we kind of do it in an elite sort of progress, and whereas I think you have to sort of have wider democratic conversations and convince people and take them along. And so, for example, I think it was on the gay marriage, or maybe I'm thinking of abortion. These things, the left and Liberals in New Zealand try to keep it out of the public sphere because they don't really trust the public. So we'd never have referendums on that. I think, and they even say it sometimes, people would vote the wrong way. People would,
they think they know better.
They know better. But when it has happened, such as in Ireland, we've actually seen big debates where people get won over to progressive ideas, and this so-called backward Catholic conservative country has voted overwhelmingly in referendums in favour of abortion law reform, in favour of gay marriage, and it's been democracy in action, and that's what I think we need a bit more of in New Zealand.
I think the key example of where they tried it and got it wrong, perhaps, is the legislation of marijuana just at the last election, because... And we saw how the Prime Minister was paralysed. Yeah. Not the it was the one before that, wasn't it?
No, it was last election.
It was the last one.
It was last, yep.
And she became paralysed. Yeah. She wouldn't give an answer on which way she was going to vote.
Well, that kind of, that was just incredible, I agree. But it kind of personified a general approach from both the Greens and Labour that they wouldn't get their hands dirty in that debate. They kind of, there wasn't much going on in that election. There wasn't a lot of policy debate. It was mostly just about how Labour had saved the country from COVID, and there was a whole policy vacuum, and so it was really made to have a great debate on the rights and wrongs of marijuana reform.
I think we did better on the euthanasia question. There
was more debate on that, absolutely. Yeah. But I thought it was a misleadership, especially from the Green Party, because it was their referendum. They had negotiated it, and then they washed their hands of it, and they were scared of losing votes. Labour were scared of losing votes by saying what they really felt. And I didn't have a problem with it being a referendum, but it should have been a proper debate.
Yeah, they just seem to have the referendum and then panic or something, because it just, like you say, there was a void. And also, I think they made the mistake, I don't know if it was Chloe Sawbrick or if it was the Greens in general, when they did speak about it, they made it about race. And so they made it into an identity thing. Yeah. And I actually think that probably turned people off the conversation, where they're told, if you don't vote this, you're a racist. Right.
I can see what you mean. Yeah. I mean, I thought Swarbrick did quite well in that she was about the only, MP on that side of things that was really putting some.
She does tend to be the only one with some bravery on that side.
Yeah, so she was brave, she did well, but it was almost like they just delegated it to her and left it, and that was really unimpressive.
Yeah, and the result was that we almost had a hung country, but just slightly lost it. So,
incredible, really.
Yeah, it was. And
so they the Greens, if you're going to negotiate, that was one of your baubles of office or one of your policy trophies, that you then have to get on the ground and have that fight, because in a sense they've made things worse. So it put the campaign backwards as far as I'm concerned, because it settled the matter in a way that the Greens
didn't want. Yeah.
And I think they could have won the debate, and certainly they would have won it if Ardern had put her heft behind it. But it meant that then, the Greens and reform advocates were like, oh, we lost that, but can't we just push it through Parliament anyhow? No.
And then there was this but we could do decrim, and it was like, well, maybe you should have done that first, maybe, I do liken it to, like you've mentioned, the gay marriage situation. Here in New Zealand, initially we did the civil union thing. Yeah. And I know that a lot of people in the community were like, we can't agree to this. This is like accepting a half measure. My position was always like, hey, let's just have the stepping stone, right? And that's the way it did kind of work out. We had the stepping stone, and we were able to marry in a way for a while. And then the country kind of got used to the idea and progressed and was okay to have that conversation. Yeah, I mean, I am not sure I have a problem with what you're saying, but I felt there wasn't really an honesty in that, because it'd be fine if people were saying this is what we're doing because it's all we can do at the moment and it's a stepping stone, but we're not giving up on gay marriage as what we actually want. Whereas the likes of Helen Clark as Prime Minister said, never. Over my dead body will we have gay marriage, And I think that was probably just us, in the community going we'll accept this now. Yeah. And then we'll try for it later. But I know. It's interesting, because I'd say that if she was asked now, she would be very pro, Oh, it's like lots of things with Helen Clark. And actually, this is one of my ongoing perennial complaints with politicians. Yeah. I tend to think they're very flexible, weak in power, and then they get out of power and they have all these great principles and they're really impressive. And Helen Clark at the moment, I think, is really impressive. Well, she's doing a lot of work, and but it's a different Helen Clark, is my point. And some of her things seems to contradict. I just sometimes think when I see what Helen Clark's talking about, I think, geez, she must be angry with whoever was Prime Minister between 1999 and 2008. Yeah, she mustn't think of them particularly highly. Yeah. Oh, that's for sure. The other example that I find funny is that Barack Obama was initially, he stated anti-gay marriage in 2008, which, because of the time, it kind of makes sense, but in America. And so I find it a bit funny when I can't remember what the issue was, but the national MPs, I think Simon was getting perhaps criticised for now being supportive of gay marriage, and I was like, well, it's good enough for Obama. Oh, that's a great point. Hey, did you ask Collins, Ifisco Collins, about his... No, I didn't. His background, because he has a socially conservative sort of background, doesn't he? I gathered that. No, we didn't get into that. I actually had a really great conversation with him about... the youth crime in particular, but also the gangs. And we talked a lot about the role of churches in South Auckland. So it was, I guess, a more conservative discussion. But he saw things like the churches and the community organisations in South Auckland as having more potential to have more of a role in taking these young people and keeping them occupied with sport and that kind of thing. So it's really interesting chat.
He's a really interesting politician, and I think he'll be a successful mayor. But
so are you calling it now?
No, not at all. But he's got to be the front runner.
Yeah.
But my question really is, and I can be corrected if I'm wrong here about his socially conservative position on gender issues, but he's very strongly backed by the left at the moment, and none of them are particularly critical of those socially conservative views in the way they would be for someone else that wasn't from their tribe. And so
that's a good point.
If there was another mayoral candidate that was the front runner who had been, as I understand, anti-gay marriage, they would be absolutely vilifying it. And if anyone was supporting them, they would be saying, how dare you, how can you support this person who wants gays put in jail or something, you know what I'm saying?
No, I totally get that.
With him, you suddenly get all the Auckland left gravitating around him, and all is forgiven. We won't mention
Do you
those
think
things.
that's why Labour initially weren't they trying to get Richard Hills or something?
I think that could be part of it.
Yeah.
That to some extent he was problematic, having the wrong social views.
But I also think, I don't know who I'd vote for if I was in Auckland still, but I also think he appeals on a larger scale so much more than a candidate like Richard Hills, who just comes across as probably a lot more privileged, North Shore, blah, blah, blah. You know, there's... in terms of the optics, I didn't think it looked very good for Labour. But do you think it was worth the kind of trade-off of, we can't have this problematic guy? I guess they never committed to Richard, though.
No, I mean, I'm not aware of what went on in the back rooms, but it was a bit of a cock-up, whatever happened.
Yeah.
And in the end, they had their bureaucratic candidate, Richard Hills, and a lot of the left activists or the public in the end weren't going for that, and they, when you had this almost wildcard candidate come up, who Collins is, he was really powerful, and I wouldn't say it's the same as like Jeremy Corbyn in the Labour Party, but I guess what I'm saying is that the Labour leadership before Corbyn really didn't want him, and he was kind of the surprise candidate that came from nowhere. They had their kind of people from the hierarchy that were, worming their way to the top, but Corbyn just leapfrogged easily because suddenly he was a bit different, and he was a bit more in touch, I think, with ordinary people like Collins is.
I agree with that, and I think Labour have been very, very smart in ditching Hills and going in with Professor Collins, because what the problem is on the other end is that they have very split vote situation happening where there's a 3 or 4 candidates who knows.
Look, I probably shouldn't talk about Auckland mayoral politics because I know very little, but but people are just assuming that the right's going to be split and that will lead Collins to come in from the left. And this is one of the problems that we've kind of been talking about over the last half hour, is to see things simply as left and right might be mistaken, because Malloy, for example, I don't know if he's the right candidate or the Trump candidate.
Right,
and, and if he's sort of the Trump candidate and is able to appeal to ordinary working class Aucklanders, he might be able to get votes in a way that Collins can't. That I suspect that's not the case, because I think Collins has got his church groups and is able to. He's come out of a South Auckland sort of on the ground situation, so it's not quite.
Malloy might have left it a bit late to build that kind of momentum.
But all I'm saying is, just because we see Malloy as being a right-wing candidate doesn't mean that he's not capable of actually winning over those ordinary people who just see someone that's not a professional careerist politician and think he's for me.
Very good. I'll finish off our conversation with just something slightly off topic. But you may have noticed, I'm not sure if you have, the conversations that we've been having here about Nanaia Mahuta and her family's influence in politics.
Oh, this is really important stuff.
And I guess my question to you is, am I going mad, or is it bizarre that the rest of the media won't even touch it?
I think that we are living in a period of heightened sensitivities around ethnicity, and we've got our first Maori Indigenous foreign minister and maybe first Maori local government minister, I'm not sure. But, this is kind of historic, and it's important for a lot of people, and they have a lot invested in it.
Yeah.
And I think the media kind of get bound up in that. And there's also in the media at the moment, there's a great sort of sensitivity not to be seen as reactionary.
Yeah.
And this is a great problem, because how do we hold account someone like Nanaia Mahuta if she has done something wrong, or if there is something untoward here, if suddenly she has that protection of her ethnicity, because we do have to be sensitive and not
absolutely
want to,
and I've been very clear in speaking on air that any kind of racism that gets attached to this issue is not welcome as far as I'm concerned.
And I'm sure there is some racism that gets attached to it. And so I think it's just easier for the media to say, no, we're not going there. And you'll see, the media, kind of observe these things on Twitter, and if you tweet these sort of things asking questions, you'll get piled on, and the media don't want that in a larger sort of circumstance. So I think they're not being brave. I think they want to keep their life easy.
I think
so I'm not. So that's my suspicion, that there's not actually something that the media are trying to cover up.
No.
But
it's self-preservation.
It's kind of self-preservation. They'll cover this, and I mean, it's not entirely true. I mean, the Herald Kate McNamara ran that story on Friday about these issues, and I think that was very well read.
I thought it was a good piece.
It was a good piece.
It was a shame it was behind the paywall.
So we kind of do have to have these debates, and I think there are questions that need to be answered from the government on this. But of course, the other problem is that Nanaia Mahuta is besieged with so many other issues at the moment. China, the Pacific, Three Waters, and we're seeing a minister that I think is in a lot of trouble. And so, that might be, in a sense, helping her out on this issue, that the media don't want to be seen as piling on too much. That's my guess.
Yeah, I think that all sounds very sensible to me, and I think, unfortunately for Minister Mahuta, she perhaps has had some chickens come home to roost on her two big portfolios at the same time. And that's not fun for her, I'm sure. But, our foreign policy is very, very important, and someone needs to be doing that job.
Well, she's increasingly being talked about as a part-time foreign minister at a time when there's a crisis in the Pacific, and then there's a crisis in Three Waters, and something has to give.
Yeah, exactly.
And so obviously the rumours are starting to go on about a cabinet reshuffle and which of those two portfolios she's going to lose, if not both of them. So
I think she'd want the local government to finish off Three Waters, wouldn't she?
Well, except for the government don't want to do Three Waters.
Yeah.
I mean, people seem to think it's strange that the government just keeps persisting with Three Waters. I don't think the government really do want to keep running with it. Mahuta does, obviously, and certain people in the caucus do. But the government desperately need a way to back down on Three Waters.
I've given them one.
Yes.
I've given them all the evidence they need.
You've handed the Prime Minister a loaded gun. And it could well turn out, you laugh, but it could well turn out to be the case that there's Mahuta has to stand down from some portfolios because of that while it's being investigated, and then should be cleared or something. But it allows the government... That happened with
Judith Collins, right? She had an investigation, but she was cleared.
Yeah. And it gets the government out of a tight spot. But no, I do think that the government probably will take her out of the local government portfolio, and that at the same time they will ditch Three Waters. I mean,
I hope you're right.
Well, when they're at 35% in the polls, down from 50%, they know that it's things like Three Waters that are dogging this government. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming in. It's been a very good chat, and I wasn't actually sure how long we were going to have this chat for, but I didn't have anything booked in, so I thought, it's going well. Let's just keep chatting, and I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thanks, Annie.
So that was Dr. Bryce Edwards, and he is from the Democracy Project and Victoria University.